Late at night in a quiet little diner, an old man sat alone in a booth, staring at the small birthday cake in front of him. A single candle flickered, casting a soft glow on his wrinkled face. His hands, weathered by time, rested on the table, untouched by the warmth of the celebration he had hoped for. No family, no friends, just silence. Across the room, a little girl watched him. She clutched a small cup of ice cream, her big, curious eyes filled with something the old man hadn't seen in a long time: kindness. She had noticed him the moment she walked in, the way he sat quietly, how no one seemed to acknowledge his presence. Something about it made her heart ache. After a moment of hesitation, she took a deep breath and walked toward him. "Is it your birthday?" she asked softly. The old man looked up, surprised. He wasn't expecting anyone to speak to him, let alone a child. A smile flickered on his face, weak but genuine. "It is," he said. Without another word, she slid into the seat across from him, setting her ice cream down. "Happy birthday," she said simply. What started as an awkward silence slowly turned into a quiet, unexpected moment of joy. They shared small conversations, laughs, and even a slice of cake. The girl's presence filled the empty space in his heart, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. As they parted ways that night, the old man watched her leave, his heart lighter than it had been in years. But the next morning, everything changed. A loud knock echoed through the man's small home. He opened the door to find two officers standing on his porch, their expressions serious. "Sir, we need to talk," one of them said. His heart pounded. What could they possibly want? And how was this connected to the little girl from the diner? He had no idea that a simple birthday dinner would lead to something that would change both of their lives forever. The old man's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the door. He had lived a quiet life for years, never expecting to see the police standing at his doorstep. His mind raced, searching for any reason why they would be here. Had something happened to the little girl? "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice rough from years of silence. One of the officers, a tall man with a serious expression, exchanged a glance with his partner. "May we come in?" The old man hesitated but nodded, stepping aside. His small home was neat but simple, faded photographs on the walls. A single chair by the window where he spent most of his days. The officers walked in, their eyes scanning the room as if searching for something. "Do you remember a young girl from the diner last night?" the second officer asked. He was younger, his tone gentler. The old man's heart clenched. "Yes," he said slowly. "She sat with me. We had cake." His voice softened at the memory. "Is she okay?" The officers didn't answer right away. Instead, the tall one pulled out a small notepad. "Did she tell you her name?" The old man frowned, thinking back. "No, she never did." The younger officer sighed. "We've been trying to locate her family." Something about the way he said it made the old man uneasy. He shifted in his chair. What happened? The officers exchanged another look, hesitation in their eyes. "We can't share details just yet," the older one said. "But we need to know, did she say anything unusual? Anything about where she was going after she left?" The old man shook his head. "She just said good night and walked out. I didn't think much of it at the time." He paused. "She seemed happy. Safe." The room fell silent. The old man's mind filled with questions, but he didn't dare ask. Something was wrong. He could feel it. And for the first time in years, he wished he wasn't alone, because whatever was happening, he had a feeling his life was about to change in ways he never could have imagined. The old man sat still, his fingers gripping the edge of his chair. The officer's silence weighed heavy in the room, thick with unspoken words. He could feel it in their careful stares. There was something they weren't telling him. "Please," he finally said, his voice quieter now. "Just tell me, is she in trouble?" The younger officer hesitated before responding. "We're not sure yet." He glanced around the small home, his eyes lingering on the old photographs hanging on the walls. When she left the diner last night, did anyone seem to be following her? The question sent a chill through him. He hadn't noticed anything. The diner had been quiet, just a few late-night regulars sipping their coffee. But now, looking back, he wondered, had he missed something? "No," he answered, shaking his head. She just walked out, alone. The older officer scribbled something in his notepad. "And you're sure she didn't mention where she lived? A family member? A school?" The old man sighed, frustration creeping into his voice. "She didn't talk much about herself. She was just kind. She sat with me when no one else would." His voice cracked slightly, surprising even himself. He hadn't realized how much that small moment had meant to him. The officers exchanged glances again. It was clear they knew something they weren't saying. The younger one leaned forward slightly. "Sir, has anyone been in contact with you since last night? Any calls, strange knocks on your door?" The old man shook his head slowly. "No, why would there be?" Before they could answer, a faint sound interrupted them, a knock. A soft, hesitant knock at the door. The officers tensed, immediately reaching for their radios. The old man's heart pounded as he turned his head toward the door. He didn't know why, but deep down, he had a feeling he already knew who it was. Slowly, he stood up and took a step forward. The room felt colder now, the weight of something unseen pressing down on him. With a shaky breath, he reached for the doorknob, not knowing that what lay beyond that door would change everything. The old man's fingers hovered over the doorknob, his breath unsteady. The officers had gone silent, their bodies tense as they positioned themselves behind him. The knock came again, this time softer, almost hesitant. His heart pounded against his ribs. Swallowing hard, he turned the knob and pulled the door open. There she was. The little girl from the diner stood in the dim porch light, her small hands clenched into fists. Her wide eyes darted between the officers before locking onto his, filled with something he couldn't quite place: fear, relief, desperation. "Sweetheart," the younger officer said gently, stepping forward. "Are you okay?" She hesitated, glancing back toward the dark street behind her. The old man followed her gaze, but there was nothing, just empty sidewalks and the soft hum of streetlights. Something about it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. She started, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know where else to go." The old man felt something shift inside him. He didn't know this child, not really. But the way she looked at him, like he was the only safe place she had left, made his chest tighten. "Come inside," he said before he could stop himself. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but didn't protest as the girl stepped in, her small frame almost swallowed by the dim glow of the living room. She clutched her arms around herself, looking like she wanted to disappear. The older officer spoke first. "We need to know where you've been, kid. People are looking for you." The girl's lips pressed together. She took a shaky breath, but didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the old man, her eyes pleading. "Please, don't let them take me back." The words sent a jolt through him. He glanced at the officers, but they looked just as stunned as he felt. "Back where?" he asked carefully. She opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, a loud bang echoed from outside. Someone was out there, and they weren't alone. The loud bang made the walls tremble. The old man's heart slammed against his chest as the officers immediately sprang into action. The younger one reached for his radio, speaking in hurried tones, while the older officer pulled his gun, motioning for everyone to stay back. The girl gasped, stepping closer to the old man. Her small hands gripped his sleeve tightly, her whole body shaking. "It's them," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They found me." The word sent a chill through him. He glanced down at her, seeing the sheer terror in her eyes. Whoever she was running from, she truly believed they were outside that door. And from the way the officers were moving, they weren't taking any chances. The younger officer peeped through the window. His face darkened. There's a car parked across the street. Engines still running. Someone's inside, watching the house. The old man swallowed hard. This was real. This wasn't just some lost child. She was in danger. And somehow, he was caught in the middle of it. The older officer turned to the girl, his voice firm but kind. "Who are they? Are they looking for you?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening around the fabric of the old man's sleeve. Finally, she whispered, "I can't go back." The words felt heavier than they should have. The old man didn't know what that meant, but something inside him twisted painfully. Another noise outside, this time footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate. Someone was coming. The old man's breath caught as a shadow passed by the window. Whoever they weren't knocking this time. They were testing the door. The older officer moved fast, pressing his back against the wall, gun raised. The younger officer motioned for the old man and the girl to stay put, his radio crackling as he called for backup. The little girl clutched the old man's arm, her voice a whisper in the thick silence. "They won't stop," she said. "Not until they take me back." The doorknob turned. The doorknob turned slowly, the air in the room thick with tension. The old man held his breath, his heart pounding as the younger officer stepped forward, ready to intervene. The older officer kept his gun trained on the door, his stance firm. The little girl gripped the old man's arm so tightly he could feel her small fingers trembling against his skin. Then silence. Whoever was outside had stopped. The old man strained to hear, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no movement, just an eerie, suffocating stillness. Then suddenly a voice. Low, controlled. "We just want the girl." The old man felt her flinch beside him. He turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who are they?" Tears welled in her eyes, but before she could answer, the older officer shouted, "Step away from the door. Hands where we can see them." A tense pause followed. Then the sound of retreating footsteps. The younger officer rushed to the window, peeking out. "They're leaving," he said, voice laced with disbelief. Just like that. The old man let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But the girl wasn't relieved. She was still gripping his sleeve, her knuckles white. "They're not gone," she whispered. "They're waiting." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The older one finally lowered his gun, but kept it close. "Backup's on the way. We'll get you somewhere safe," he said, kneeling to the girl's level. "But you need to tell us the truth now. Who are they?" She hesitated. Then finally she whispered, "They're not my family." The old man felt a chill run down his spine. "Then who are they?" The girl's voice was barely audible. "They took me. A long time ago. I ran away." The officers tensed. The weight of her words settled over the room like a heavy fog. Before anyone could respond, tires screeched outside. Headlights flashed through the window. And then the unmistakable sound of someone forcing their way in through the back door. The crash of the back door sent a jolt through the old man's chest. The younger officer spun around, drawing his weapon, while the older officer grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her behind him. The old man felt frozen for just a second. Then instinct took over. He moved in front of the girl, shielding her. Footsteps pounded down the hallway. Heavy, rushed. The house felt smaller, the walls closing in. The officers shouted commands, but whoever had entered wasn't stopping. Then another sound. Sirens. Bright red and blue lights flooded the front window, the glare cutting through the dim room. The pounding footsteps hesitated. The officers used that moment to move fast. The younger one rushed toward the back, while the older officer kept his gun raised, positioning himself between the intruder and the rest of them. A loud scuffle, a sharp yell, and then silence. A few agonizing seconds passed before the younger officer's voice rang out. "We got him." The old man let out a shaky breath, his hands still trembling. He looked down at the little girl. She was staring at the hallway, her face pale, her eyes wide. But she wasn't crying. More officers flooded the house, securing the area. The man who had broken in, one of the people chasing her, was taken away in handcuffs. The older officer knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "It's over. You're safe now." The girl looked up at the old man, searching his face for reassurance. He gave her a small nod. Later, after the chaos settled, one of the officers explained that she had been reported missing years ago. She had escaped from people who never should have had her. And she had run, to a diner, to an old man sitting alone, because something in her had told her he was safe. As she sat beside him in his living room, wrapped in a warm blanket, she finally exhaled. "Thank you," she whispered. The old man didn't say anything at first. He just reached over, giving her small hand a gentle squeeze. "You're not alone anymore," he finally said.